How can a battle end in a draw, yet change the course of a nation? How can both armies bleed and break, only for one side to lose far more than soldiers? On September 17, 1862, the small town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, became the unwilling host to the single bloodiest day in American history. Over 22,000 men fell not over months, but in just 12 hours. The landscape became a patchwork of corpses. A sunken road filled with bodies became known forever as the Bloody Lane. But this was not just a clash of muskets and cannons. It was the moment the Union's survival, the Confederacy's ambition, and the very meaning of the war collided in a single day. And it all might have turned out differently if one Union corporal hadn't found a lost piece of paper under a tree. This is the story of Antietam. The United States was not united. By 1862, the country was two nations at war: the Union, fighting to preserve the Republic, and the Confederate States of America, fighting for their independence and the right to maintain slavery. That September, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, made his boldest move yet, a full-scale invasion of the North. His goals were clear: shift the battlefield away from devastated Virginia, sway Maryland, a border state, into joining the Confederacy, and, perhaps most importantly, win foreign recognition from Britain and France. But fate and poor operational security had other plans. As Lee's army moved through Maryland, a Union corporal stumbled upon a lost dispatch. Order 191 wrapped around cigars in an abandoned Confederate camp. The document outlined Lee's full troop dispositions, including the division of his army. This golden intelligence fell into the hands of Major General George B. McClellan, a man both praised and cursed by his peers. Brilliant in organization, slow in battle, McClellan had failed to capture Richmond and was under immense political pressure from President Lincoln. Now he had in his hands something no general could ignore: Lee's exact plan. McClellan could destroy the Confederate army in detail, one piece at a time. But would he? George McClellan was not a coward, but he feared risk. He imagined Confederate strength where there was weakness, saw phantom battalions behind every hill, and believed himself outnumbered even when the opposite was true. Still, the discovery of Order 191 stirred him to action. He moved to intercept Lee's forces, which had become dangerously split. Lee had left Stonewall Jackson to take Harper's Ferry, while Longstreet moved elsewhere. But McClellan, cautious even in opportunity, delayed. It took him 2 days to move after South Mountain. This gave Lee just enough time to consolidate at Sharpsburg, positioning his army along Antietam Creek. He had only around 40,000 men, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. He knew the odds, but he also knew McClellan. Lee set his line: Stonewall Jackson on the left, James Longstreet on the right, cavalry to patch the gaps. And behind it all, the town of Sharpsburg. Lee didn't need to win, he just needed to not lose. McClellan devised a classic echelon attack, a cascading wave of assaults from right to left. First, General Hooker would hit the left, then Mansfield and Sumner in the center. Finally, Ambrose Burnside would cross the bridge on the right and deliver the knockout blow. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it would become chaos. Just before dawn, General Hooker led the First Corps south, aiming to circle the Confederate left and surprise Jackson. But within half an hour, the Union troops encountered rebel skirmishers and the field ignited. The battlefield was a cornfield, stretching between the east woods and the west woods. In this crucible of maize and blood, some of the most vicious fighting of the war would unfold. Hooker's men drove Jackson's forces back into the west woods. Artillery on Nicodemus Hill rained fire. Union guns responded with over 24 cannons. Amid this maelstrom, General Ricketts led a thunderous push, smashing through 7 Confederate brigades, tearing apart Jackson's vaunted Stonewall Division. In under 2 hours, the Confederate left was crumbling. But McClellan's echelon strategy meant the rest of the army, fresh, ready, stood idle. Lee, realizing the danger, shifted 2 brigades under General Hood to reinforce Jackson. Hood's men were exhausted, hungry, and outnumbered, but the surprise and desperation drove them forward. Hooker's men met ferocious resistance. The cornfield, already soaked in blood, became a furnace. Shells rained down, rifle fire from all directions. The 7th Wisconsin circled and struck Hood's flank, but the Confederates held. The next blow was meant to come from General Mansfield and his corps, but confusion reigned. Hooker's struggles led Mansfield to believe he needed to support the faltering attack, not begin a new one. Mansfield ordered his troops to dig in, not press forward. As Mansfield approached the front, he attempted to mount a fence. His horse refused. Forced to dismount, he continued on foot. Somewhere between the fence and the fog-shrouded woods, a Union soldier, mistaking him for a Confederate scout, fired. Mansfield was mortally wounded, shot by his own men. Minutes later, Hooker himself was hit in the foot, and command passed to a bewildered General Williams. No clear orders, no full understanding of McClellan's plan. Still, he ordered an attack from the east woods. Union troops surged toward Dunker Church, fighting for every yard. They captured it briefly, only to find themselves facing a fresh Confederate counterattack. As the dust settled around Dunker Church, the 2nd Corps under General Edwin V. Sumner began to arrive. Sumner, the oldest field commander in the war, had been delayed. Now, behind schedule, he was eager to act. But what should have been a coordinated thrust turned into piecemeal engagement. Instead of waiting for full alignment, Sumner ordered an immediate push into the west woods. His men, divided and unsupported, advanced without realizing how quickly Confederate strength had rebounded. This was McClellan's great flaw, a battle plan elegant on parchment but executed in fragments. Echelon attacks require timing, one push to weaken, the next to break. But the Union's attacks had become isolated salvos, each swallowed by the defense. In the west woods, Sumner's divisions advanced in columns, a formation disastrous for wooded combat. Confederates under Jackson struck with a coordinated flank attack, devastating Sumner's lead elements. General Gorman, one of Sumner's subordinates, recalled, "The enemy's attack was so sudden, so overwhelming, that I had no time to lose." The Union lines collapsed and fell back nearly 200 yards, bloodied and disoriented. Only the arrival of General Franklin's 6th Corps stabilized the retreat. Franklin, unlike many others that day, wanted to press the advantage. He had orders to hold the high ground, but seeing the disarray, he proposed a renewed assault. Sumner, however, argued for caution. The two generals clashed. Word reached McClellan. But McClellan, watching the battle from afar, refused to commit his strategic reserve. He feared a trap. He saw Confederate strength not where it was, but where it wasn't. And so, another Union opportunity slipped away. While the northern front smoldered, action shifted to the Confederate center, anchored at a sunken farm road later known as Bloody Lane. Here, General D.H. Hill had arrayed Confederate troops in a natural trench, giving them a formidable defensive position. Union forces under General William French launched multiple assaults. Each was repelled with staggering losses. The Irish Brigade under General Meagher joined the fray, advancing with bayonets drawn and green flags waving. They made it to the edge of the lane but were met with devastating volleys. Robert E. Rhodes, commanding a Confederate wing, saw an opportunity. He ordered a countercharge into a perceived gap. But a misunderstanding unraveled everything. One of Rhodes' officers misinterpreted the order as a general withdrawal. The confusion spread like fire. One brigade fell back, then another, until the entire line began to retreat. The Confederates abandoned Bloody Lane. The Union surged forward and captured the position, too stunned by their sudden success to realize how close they'd come to disaster only minutes before. Still, the opportunity to break through the Confederate center was real. But McClellan, once again seeing ghosts, withheld his reserves. He had 20,000 men uncommitted. But in his mind, Lee surely had more. He did not. Lee had none. Now, all eyes turned to the southern flank, where General Ambrose Burnside was meant to execute the final phase of the echelon assault. He had 12,000 troops. Before him stood a single Confederate brigade under General Robert Toombs, fewer than 500 men, stretched across a hill overlooking Antietam Creek. The crossing was narrow, a stone bridge soon to bear Burnside's name. McClellan had issued his attack order by 8 a.m., but Burnside delayed, then delayed again. Whether from miscommunication, vanity, or simple stubbornness, Burnside would not budge until prodded by the Inspector General himself, the Army's highest internal enforcer. Only at noon did Burnside act. His men charged the bridge and met with withering fire. The narrow stone arch became a choke point, bodies piled in the water. Desperate flanking maneuvers eventually succeeded, but precious hours had been lost. By the time the Federals crossed and began to march on Sharpsburg, the day had grown old. And Lee's last hope, a miracle, arrived just in time. At the battle's outset, Lee had dispatched General A.P. Hill to secure Harper's Ferry, 17 miles away. When he heard the sound of cannons behind him, Hill force marched his men back toward Sharpsburg double time, covering the ground in record pace. Now, at the final moment, Hill's 3,000 Confederates arrived, many in captured Union uniforms, and slammed into Burnside's flank just as the Federals prepared their final advance. The effect was chaos. Confusion reigned as blue fought blue. The Union offensive halted. Burnside committed his reserves, but it was too late. What had been a last chance for breakthrough turned into another stalemate. Darkness approached. Musket fire dimmed. Men collapsed where they stood. By nightfall, both sides clung to their positions, too battered to move. Antietam had ended not in victory, but in exhaustion. As the sun rose over Sharpsburg on September 18th, the battlefield was silent. Smoke still drifted from cannon barrels. Trees stood scorched. Corpses lay stacked in cornfields, roadbeds, and the waters of Antietam Creek. McClellan, ever cautious, did not renew the attack. He had won ground, but not decisively. He had repelled an invasion, but allowed the enemy to escape. Lee, defiant despite his losses, remained on the field throughout the day. His generals pleaded with him to retreat, citing shattered brigades and exhausted ammunition. Still, Lee resisted. "If General McClellan wants to try again," he said grimly, "I will be here." But McClellan did not try again. By nightfall, Lee's Army of Northern Virginia began its withdrawal across the Potomac River, battered but intact. The cost? Union losses. Over 12,500 casualties, including 2,100 dead. Confederate losses. Estimated 10,500 casualties, with more than 1,500 killed. Total casualties. 22,700 men, dead, wounded, or missing in one day. No other single day in American history, before or since, has matched that toll. And yet, neither side could claim outright victory. So why, then, does Antietam matter? Antietam was a strategic turning point, not because of a decisive military blow, but because of what it enabled. President Abraham Lincoln, long waiting for a Union victory, now had the political justification to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. This redefined the Civil War. No longer was it solely a war to preserve the Union, it became a moral crusade to abolish slavery. This shift carried international consequences. The British and French, who had considered recognizing the Confederacy, backed away. Public support for a pro-slavery state was now untenable in Europe. The Confederacy's dream of foreign intervention died at Antietam. For the North, the war gained a new purpose. For the South, the window of diplomatic salvation closed. And for the soldiers on the ground, blue and gray, the war continued, bloodier and more bitter than ever before. Walk the field at Bloody Lane today, and the sunken road is quiet. But if you stand long enough, you might imagine what once thundered through there, not just bullets, but hopes, desperation, resolve, pride. Antietam was not the end of the Civil War. But it was the end of the idea that this conflict could be short, that it could be resolved in tidy terms, that the Union would shatter or the Confederacy would rise in glory. Instead, the nation entered its deepest darkness. The Civil War would rage on for nearly 3 more years, more would die, more cities would burn, and only at the cost of a shattered generation would the United States be reborn. And so we ask, if McClellan had acted decisively, if Burnside had crossed at dawn, if Sumner had waited an hour, would the war have ended in 1862? Or was Antietam, like so much of history, fated to be not a resolution, but a reckoning? At Legacy Files, we explore the moments where history broke open and the world never looked the same again. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told in full, with all their complexity and humanity, consider subscribing. There are more battles to uncover, more voices to recover, and more truths to remember before they are lost to silence.